this is known. It's not an accident that this is known as novo coronavirus. Novo means new, and the coronavirus is dangerous precisely because nobody in the world has immunity to it. Nobody in the world has, I mean, my friend. Yes, influenza, yes, go on. My friend, why is it called novo coronavirus? Is it a virus that people have got immunity to? No. So anybody here who gets that virus has no immunity to it, right? The only parallel in our time, and I remember when they started, I remember when they started talking about the AIDS virus, and everyone was paranoid at the time of touching a cup and a glass. That was wrong. It was wrong in this respect. It was wrong that it was transmittable by touching glasses and things other people had touched. But it was correct that millions of people died as a consequence of that. It was correct that millions of people died as a result of that virus because nobody had immunity to it. That is why it is called novo coronavirus. No immunity, new on the scene.
You've got to compare it to SARS or Ebola.
So,
those are comparable diseases. When SARS and Ebola happened,
SARS had a far lower transmission rate and a far higher death rate, right? SARS death rate was about 10%. And it also had a self-limiting scale of replication. It remained effectively within the borders of the People's Republic of China. This disease, however, has already spread. You see, why I'm taking you up on the press issue is the follows. When the Chinese did lock down Wuhan, you will remember, and you can go back online and look at the news from the time, from a couple of weeks ago, and from the 23rd, 24th, when Wuhan and Hubei were locked down. At that time, firstly, a positive thing that I can say is this, which they're not reported in the press here barely. The Spring Festival began around the 10th of January in China. The Spring Festival means nearly 300 million people moved around China in those weeks, 2 weeks before the lockdown in Hubei. Nearly 300 million people. There is no such migration anywhere else in the world of anywhere near the scale of what we've seen in the Spring Festival period running up to the lockdown in Hubei and Wuhan city. There is no comparable mass migration in the world. And yet, by locking down on the 24th, when the numbers in Wuhan and Hubei province, nearly the same number of population, 58 million in Hubei, 65 million in Britain. So nearly the same amount of population, and yet the British government, or better said, the mass media said, Chinese didn't act quickly enough. The numbers in China, by Wednesday this week, the numbers in Britain will be equal to the numbers in China at the time that they carried out the lockdown. The contrarian aspect, which strengthens your type of argument, in theory, is that nevertheless, 300 billion people moved around the country. But the difference is this. In China, the Communist Party and its apparatus of governance, whether you like it or not, is not the issue here. They disseminated information and material resources to contain the outbreak, both inside Hubei province, the epicenter, to which 40,000 medics were sent, volunteered to go in the face of danger to defend the interests of the people of Hubei. Second thing they did was in all the major cities in China. Well then go away, my friend, if you know everything. Go away. If there's nothing to worry about and you're not bothered about finding out what I've got to say, go away, my friend. Yes, I'm making a lot of points. The point is this. You can't simultaneously argue the type of argument you made, which is the Chinese have a lying press and manipulate the story, and at the same time say that when the Western media claimed that the same numbers as Germany has now got, for example. When Germany got, or when it said 500 people now in Germany or more, the official figures, when China had 500 people, they locked down the whole of Hubei. And they locked down, to a large degree, all the major cities in China. And what they did was, they had these, you've seen it on television, they have these temperature testing devices that will put to your head if you want to. If you want to, you could do a voluntary, but I know in Britain, people won't like that. So, okay, have them as voluntary in locations around the city. How many of you have got a thermometer at home? How many? Hands up who's got a thermometer. Right. So how do you know if you're passing the disease on or not? A lot of people will be asymptomatic. The likelihood is that if you're asymptomatic, you will not spread the disease. The likelihood is. But the transition between being asymptomatic to being symptomatic, having a high temperature, disseminating viral loads amongst the population is quite rapid. Therefore, you should have the population testing their temperature twice or 3 times a day. That is a far better mechanism for containment than the argument the British government is now making, wash your hands and sing happy birthday. They are saying you should not wear a mask. Why are they saying you should not wear a mask? I bought some masks for my mother and myself. Here is a mask that you'll get in a local pharmacy. By the way, these masks that cost about 5 pence to make are now being sold in pharmacies in London for £2.99 each for single use. I went into the local pharmacy in Ladbroke Grove, and there they had these and a mask. And I said, what's the difference between that one and that one? This one, they said, is single use. The other one, they said, is 2 weeks use. So I said, okay, I'll get one of them for me and my mum. I took the 2-week use mask home. I then looked at the numbers and letters printed on it that identify what it is. When I looked on the internet, I found this particular mask they are selling me in the pharmacy in London, where we're all so clever and we know so much. In the pharmacy in London, they're selling dust masks with FFP, that's the standard of the containment of the size of the particles that enter through the material. FFP1, dust masks. They're to be used when you're doing sawing or when you're tearing down things in a building in order to control aerosol. This is an airborne liquid droplet disease. It can also, to a certain degree, become aerosolized and spread through things like tubes, buildings, enclosed spaces. We are safer here than we are in Primark. Right? So, now, this aerosolized thing can only be contained by this type of equipment. Now, you can buy these respirators, which are FFP3 standard. That means they're used by building workers or site workers who spray things, poisons or aerosols or paint or something like that. They're used by them as a protection mechanism because the FFP3 standard guarantees protection against aerosol. Now, how long can they be used? Well, each of these things can be opened and replaced. They have filters inside them that can protect you for a period of perhaps a week, 2 weeks, depending how much you wear it. You only need to wear this type of thing in an external environment like a tube or a train or a bus. Now, they're about £25 in the DIY or in the building workers shops. That's where you'll get them. You won't get them in a local pharmacy. The pharmacies are selling duds. Having said that, the advice of the British government not to wear masks is not because it's not safer to wear masks. It is safer to wear masks. About 5 times safer to wear masks than not to wear masks. If you check the video of the Chief Medical Advisor of England, Professor Chris Whitty, when he's talking to the Select Committee on Social Care a couple of days ago, advising the government and informing the British population about the threats of the disease. This same Chris Whitty turns around and says, alongside the British government, you should cough into a tissue. You should fold up the tissue, put it away. So what does he do? He says this during the meeting, but watch the 1.5 hour interview. He coughs without protection on multiple occasions, directly at the other people. When he does cough, one time into something, it's into his hand. He then puts his hand on a table that workers have to clean up after him. Ask yourself this, why the British government is taking the attitude it's taking. Because they know that unlike China, if the disease, or better said, and I'll be clear about this, I believe the rate of expansion will be much more rapid than most people here think. I believe by midweek or end of the week, we'll have at least 500 cases. In 2 weeks' time, we'll have 2,000 to 3,000 cases, and within a few weeks, it'll be tens of thousands or even millions in Britain. In China, they succeeded. In China, they succeeded in containing the disease by locking down for the period of duration in which the virus can incubate and come out. So even though the population had moved in their hundreds of millions around China, which they have not done even around the whole world since that time, by locking down, they isolated those people. When they got the disease, they could report it, and when they could report it, they could be isolated from others. The British government claim that if you live in an apartment, like many people do in London, shared with 3 or 4 other people, and one person gets the coronavirus, comes down with it, they're saying, stay at home and don't use the same towel. That is rubbish. Utter and complete rubbish. If someone in your house gets coronavirus, you need to leave that house, or they need to leave that house. Because otherwise, because this is an airborne, aerosolized and droplet-based disease, it will inevitably spread to the other people in the house, just as it has on all the cruise ships. When they said they were locked down, remember that English couple locked down on the cruise ship, and yet the disease, even though they were locked down in their cabins, and they rarely went out of their cabin, still they got the disease. And hundreds of others got the disease inside that ship. Now you can complain all you like against how terrible the Chinese government is. And there are things I disagree with about the Chinese government. But I tell you this, wasn't it the case that we were told everyone's being locked up in Xinjiang? Why haven't they all come down with coronavirus? Isn't everyone in prison in China? Or millions in prison in China? Why haven't they come down with the coronavirus? Because they've taken the necessary environmental protection measures to protect against the disease, which our governments are not doing for the following reason. I didn't finish my point about the masks. Why are they not saying we should wear masks? Because they know that if everyone goes to buy a mask, there won't be enough masks. Just the same as in Germany and in France, they've discovered that now the emergency is there. They've got 500 in France, 500 in Germany, I'm not sure how many, 400 something in France. They know they don't have the masks, even enough masks for the medical staff. Go to a hospital now. Go to a hospital now, or a medical centre now, or a pharmacy now in London. You won't find even the staff wearing masks. In other words, the medical staff in Britain, just the same as at the beginning of the outbreak in Wuhan, caught the disease and even spread the disease to others. Now, why am I pointing these things out? Because, you see, here's some data. Assuming the British government is telling the truth, and that they're expecting 20% of the population, because they're not taking any measures to stop it, they're expecting 20% of the population to catch the disease. So 20% of the British population is 13 million people. 13 million people at a 1% death rate is 130,000 people expected to die.
The government think it's going to be 20%.
Here it's in this speech by Chris Whitty to this. He's the chief medical officer of England, and he made the report to the House of Commons Select Committee 2 days ago. He said 20%, and he repeated it multiple times. Now, what he said was, however, what he said was he said 20% were infected in Hubei. This is a lie. What it is that the British government, I guess this is what's happened, is at the Cobra meeting, someone like Dominic Cummings or Boris Johnson was sitting there, and they said, oh, the Chinese are lying anyway. It's far higher. Don't forget, a little while ago, everyone was saying the Chinese figures are all wrong, right? So then they said, because they expected that the Chinese measures would not work.
What are we talking about these measures? What are the measures?
The measures are isolation. You see,
but you said the type of isolation of London flats is not...
the isolation proposed by the British government will not work.
So
But the issue is this: if you isolate it now, at least for 3 weeks, let's take the ultimate scenario. Hang on, let me just explain to you. Let's say everyone was on board, and the ultimate scenario, you wanted to snuff the disease out within a month or two. Let me finish what I'm saying. If you lock down now 100% for 3 weeks, we would know exactly who's got the disease. The figures would probably rise to maybe 5 or 10,000, but you'd know who they are. You could contain it. You could wait until it rides itself out. Nearly everyone under the age of 50 will recover perfectly well. It's those over 60 years of age, 50, certain higher proportion, over 60 years of age, over 80 years of age, you're talking about nearly 10% of the population.
With underlying health conditions.
And people with underlying health conditions as well. But in any case, you're talking about a total rate of the detected figures. And you can reckon the detected figures are lower than the actual figures. But of the detected figures, World Health Organization shows 3.4% infection rate. A death rate. You can assume in a country with advanced medical equipment like Britain that it could be down to perhaps 0.5% or 1%. But if you allow the disease to spread to 13 million people, and I quote you Boris Johnson, he said, expect 20% of the workforce to be off work. What does that mean? Expect 20% of the population to come down with the illness. That's what he means. And that's why they're coming out with this figure. Not because it was factually based on Hubei, but because they are predicting, on the base of not doing anything, or of stiff upper lip, we're British, it won't affect us, snotted out on the corner, that this somehow will be contained. It will not be contained. And they will be an incubating point to spread this disease right throughout the world. Now, these are the people, don't forget this. This is the irony of it all. The biggest farce of the whole bloody thing. Boris Johnson, Dominic Cummings, let me just get this out, because you'll like this. Dominic Cummings, Boris Johnson, the kings of Brexit, the champions of an independent Britain. Their slogan for the last 4 years, coming out of their rectum, was the following: Brexit means take back control of our borders, ladies and gentlemen. But if you go to the British airports, and you go to King's Cross, and you go to the shipping entry points, there is no control over temperature of people coming in. No control over the amount of people coming in with the disease. There we have it. There's Brexit for you. There's what they really meant. Bullshit, bullshit, bullshit. When you actually need control, they have zero control. Why? Because they are sitting there in their offices. It's the nature of capitalism.
What would you have done?
They are all short of resources. They're all short of resources.
What do you think of Italy?
Did he actually say
And yes, I believe that. Yes, I believe that. All borders should have temperature controls immediately. All subway entrances should have temperature controls immediately. All major housing blocks, all hospitals should have temperature controls immediately. And yes, if people If the population think Britain's so different, we're so free, we're so independent, we're not having, okay, make the test voluntary. Make the test voluntary and allow the individual buildings, transportation hubs and so on to decide if they'll allow people on to the tube if they're not being willing to be tested. It's not a difficult, just got this done, right? What's the problem? Why can't you do it? Because they cannot, just one second. They do not have the capacity. This is how fucked this country is. They do not have the capacity. Would you mind moving a bit further away? Would you mind just a bit further away? The first time in 30 years I've got a legitimate ground for telling him that.